It's not just heartbreak. It's heartbreak on the biggest stage in the entire world. So she's like, can I please just be crazy just for a minute? Taylor takes a lot of responsibility for her own actions, and she did want a commitment of marriage. Oven, microwave, like what is she doing writing that into a poem? It was house and then cardiac arrest. But the story isn't mine anymore. Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. It's Nina. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. And if you're not new, thanks for coming back. I can't even believe it has been 2 weeks that this album has been out. I have so enjoyed going through the entire double album, listening to all the songs, trying to learn all the lyrics. And ever since I realized that there was this in summation poem as kind of like the prologue to the album, I knew I wanted to go through and break it down line by line and go on a little deep dive here of this poem, because I feel like it is so much more important than people are realizing to the meaning of the entire album. I didn't even realize that this was a thing. I didn't see it until after we had listened to the album, because it wasn't until I got my physical copies of the vinyls and the CDs that I realized that this poem existed. So if you have it on vinyl, it's gonna be in the little storybook here. There's the Stevie Nicks poem, which I'm thinking of also breaking down at some point, but at the very end of the book we have this poem, and in my unboxing video of all the CDs and vinyls, I read through it out loud, and every time I read it, I get chills. It's literally so good and so telling of this album. And I think it was so necessary for her to add this, because I think she wanted us to know that this album isn't going to be exactly what we thought it might be about. And this poem is kind of like reading the synopsis of a book before actually reading the book, like kind of knowing how it's going to end, and then going back and reading the book knowing the ending, having that in the back of your mind. I saw someone say that this poem was Taylor's thesis statement for the entire album, and I thought that was a really good way of putting it. But essentially, I think she just wanted to say her piece, set the record straight for what to expect with the album. Basically, don't assume that this is your normal breakup album, because it's a lot more than that. And I really feel like she has never spelled out the subject matter of her songs so directly than with this poem. I think she really wanted the truth to be brought to light and for us to learn from it, essentially. And that brings us into our first stanza. So let's just go through this line by line. Recently, I've been adding protein into my morning coffee, and it has been amazing. I highly recommend. Usually I have chai tea if I'm going to be spilling tea in the video, but today we definitely needed coffee. I think that goes for the album as well. Caffeine, much needed to get through this. Okay, so she begins with in summation. I'm assuming this is the title of the poem, just because it's like center at the very top. Obviously that means a summary of what is to come. This poem encapsulates everything that the album is about in this brief summary. And the thing about poetry is that yes, it is short. It is shorter than prose or books, but the real estate in poetry, it's like each word has a higher value. For me, I was an English major. I got my emphasis in creative writing, and I would just remember if we were going through poetry, every single word needs to count. You can't have a single word that is just there to fill the space. And since you have to be so concise, every single line is filled with so much meaning, and you just have to keep that in mind. So this first stanza, I feel like I'm reading a storybook. At this hearing, I stand before my fellow members of the Tortured Poets Department. Just in this first line, at this hearing, it almost sounds like a trial, because obviously, if you're on trial, you go to a hearing for, your punishment or whatever. It's almost like she's pleading her case. She opens this up, and you imagine her, in a courtroom, pacing back and forth, saying, I stand before my fellow members of the Tortured Poets Department. She's like talking directly to us as the readers in the room, and she's about to plead her case for why she needed to write this album. With a summary of my findings, a debrief, a detailed rewinding. And when she's saying a summary of my findings, she's meaning the life experiences that she has collected over the past few years. She is sharing it for a purpose, a lesson, and a precautionary tale to all who are about to listen. This poem is the preface to her work. So she's like, pay attention here. And when she says a detailed rewinding, she's talking about obviously telling the story of how things actually happened, not just what has been speculated. The true story in her eyes. Because she says, for the purpose of warning, for the sake of reminding. She's like, I'm not just gonna dig up my entire past for no reason. This is a warning to you. If you're gonna go through these life experiences, I'm just gonna remind you what can happen and what comes from certain actions taken. Like, she's saying you wouldn't go back into your past and detail the most raw heartbreak, lowest moment of your life without there being a bigger reason for it. And that's what she's always done with all of her songs that she has written, and she's reminding you of that. She's like, remember, I'm a songwriter and I am going to write about everything so that I can get through it and so that you can learn something from me. And when you think about like the parallel she's drawing with a court case, of course, at the end of the case, you debrief. You talk about everything that has been laid out, all the evidence, and then you can move on. So that is our first stanza, setting it up here. So she's got her disclaimers out of the way. As she jumps into this next stanza, she's reminding you who the narrator is. She is setting the context. As you might all unfortunately recall, I had been struck with the case of a restricted humanity. And here she is saying, I'm Taylor Swift. Essentially, she's putting into perspective the context of her life and reminding us that she is Taylor freaking Swift. That is a very important part, key detail to why all of this is magnified for her. It's not just heartbreak. It's heartbreak on the biggest stage in the entire world of 7 billion people that are criticizing you. And she's not using it as an excuse. She's using it as something to explain the insanity. Obviously, we know she has been under scrutiny since very young. She's been in the spotlight for so many, 18 years. Every single era she's been through, there's always gonna be somebody criticizing her, saying she's not doing the right thing. She has no privacy. She can't go in public places anymore. She's had to hide away, essentially. She can't, like, restricted humanity. She can't just do everything we do every day. That's not something that she, like, is angry about per se. It's just how her life is. And she always said, like, I do get tired, but I never get tired of it because this is what I wanted and I knew that. So anyways, just providing context as the narrator. I think this also goes along with the fact that her 6-year relationship was very private, shielded, protected, restricted. She was with somebody who did not like being in the public eye and did not like essentially being Mr. Taylor Swift. And so because he didn't like it, she kind of had to dim her sparkle. And we'll get into that later on in the poem as well. But again, he didn't let her be jeweled. She felt trapped and caged, which is a huge metaphor throughout this entire album. This is one of the main themes throughout the album where she's feeling restricted, trapped, and I feel like a lot of the songs deal with feeling trapped and then being free and her reaction, her emotional, like how she dealt with all of that. And then we have this last line, which is one of my favorite lines, which explains my plea here today of temporary insanity. And it's funny because if you think of this in the court case metaphor, there are times when crimes are committed and people plead insanity or like mental health problems, and I think that's kind of the parallel she's playing into. I did all these crazy things because I felt crazy. Basically, she's pleading with us the audience. Can I just be crazy for a second? Remember that I'm Taylor Swift and I don't get to be a normal human most days. And she has said, I have a hard time feeling like a person sometimes. So she's like, can I please just be crazy just for a minute? She knows that some of the behavior is irrational, but that is what love does to you. That is what life does to you. Sometimes you will do crazy things to get through your life. That is this whole album. She's like, can I just be absolutely insane for a second and like write all these songs about my situationship that happened? Can I be literally crazy for a minute? Like, who's afraid of little old me? Crazy. Like, I'm coming out of the asylum for 1 second and then I will be mentally stable, but I just need to get through this. Temporary, not forever. And she's written insanity like spaced out, and it kind of draws emphasis to that. She didn't write this album in a good mental state, is what she's saying. Later on, she'll talk about mania. That's basically what a manic episode is, temporary insanity. So she says she wrote this album, it was basically like a fever dream. Moving on to the next stanza. You see, the pendulum swings, oh the chaos it brings, leads the caged beast to do the most curious things. So she's talking about the pendulum being, she's in this 6-year, comfortable, safe relationship. And then she gets out of that relationship and she swings into this chaotic situationship, old flame rekindled situation that's like intense emotions and love bombs and the complete opposite. So her life has had all of these like dramatic shifts from one thing to complete 180 over here. And she's saying like it brought chaos when that pendulum swung back. I was caged. I felt trapped. And once I got out of my cage, I just like went nuts. She like was unhinged. She was also going from private relationship to public relationship. Literally, I think it's been exactly a year since Nashville Eras Tour where I was there. The second night of the show, I impulsively bought a resale ticket to be on the floor at the show, literally like 10 minutes before Taylor came on stage. And I remember seeing that Matty Healy was there the night before, and so I thought maybe he's gonna be there again. And as I was walking to my seat on the floor, I passed the VIP tent and he was right there, and I took a video because my sister is a fan of the 1975, so I had to take a video for her. But also I just like couldn't even believe it because this rumor was so wild to me and I couldn't even believe I was seeing it with my own eyes happening. From then on, that relationship was the first public thing in so long because Taylor would be pictured out with Joe sometimes, but like super rarely. He would always be sprinting them into the car, whatever. And then as soon as she got into this relationship with Matty Healy, they were out and about and it didn't seem like they were trying to hide their relationship at all. I think she felt free and liked being shown off. Per se. He was at the Eras Tour for many, many shows in a row, and Joe never really did that. I'm not like trying to compare them, I'm just showing the juxtaposition in this poem is like she is drawing that line. This was safe and comfortable and a little unsettling and a little unfulfilled, and she felt stuck and trapped. Then she goes into this crazy relationship where he makes all these promises, love bombs, and like says he's gonna give her everything that the other guy couldn't give her, and it's passion, it's intense, it's like we're gonna be together forever, and it's short-lived. It's a manic phase. The caged beast set free. And I don't mean to attribute like directly to certain people because I feel like Taylor's art stands on its own without having to point to certain people, but I think she kind of wants us to know the truth about all of that, and that's how she speaks to us. She'll never speak about it directly, but she always speaks about it in her art, and then she says it's ours to take and to interpret. I think it helps in explaining the meaning of the poem to kind of point to certain relationships, but I'm really gonna try not to say anything terrible about her exes because I just don't think that's what she wants us to do. I just think she wants us to know the story. Being a fan so long and seeing all of her relationships happen and then end, people are very quick to turn around and be, you know, we really loved Joe in the beginning. He's the one. They've been together for so long. They must be engaged or gonna get married. And then the minute they break up, everyone's like, well, I never liked him, or like, he always had this wrong with him. And like, I think you can honor what he brought into her life was good in the beginning, and then it just didn't work out. You know, mistakes were made, probably by him, maybe her as well. And I think Taylor takes a lot of responsibility for her own actions in this album as well, especially in her Instagram caption when she said, turns out a lot of my wounds were self-inflicted. So it's not really saying anyone is to blame, but it's just saying the story of what happened, essentially. Just thought I would throw that in there. Okay, let's keep going. The next line, lovers spend years denying what's ill-fated. Resentment rotting away galaxies we created. The way that she writes lovers is with the L, just like the album cover. So I think that is a reference to her long-term relationship. Spending years denying what is ill-fated. This whole stanza kind of reminds me of You're Losing Me. They stayed together even though they knew deep down it was not going to work eventually, because I think he didn't want marriage, she did, and I think he kept enough hope for maybe one day he would want to get married, and I think she held on to the hope, but knowing in the back of her mind that he really wasn't going to change his mind no matter what she did. And I think that resentment rotted away at her, that he was never going to change for her. Like, sometimes I think people think, well, love is enough if it's the right person, but sometimes people, if what you want in the future doesn't align, then you're just kind of in limbo. I think because that was her longest relationship, she thought that it was the end for her, like that was her person, just denying that it could end. And I think, again, that resentment just increased over time because she knew he was never going to make the next step. He wasn't going to break up with her, but he also was never going to fully commit to her forever. And that's like a harsh realization she had to come to eventually. You know, even You're Losing Me, she wrote at the end of 2021, and they were together for another year-ish after she wrote You're Losing Me. So that's how you know she was really hanging on for dear life. And it's funny because when you look at the grief playlist that she made, a lot of the songs that are in the denial playlist are from Lover. Lover, the song itself, just looking at that, you're realizing, oh, she was in denial for a while. Stars placed and glued meticulously by hand next to the ceiling fan. This reminds me of like those glow-in-the-dark stars that you would put on your ceiling as a kid, and then when you turn the lights off at night, they would glow on your ceiling. I don't know, I feel like that is kind of like the visual element I'm seeing in this stanza, but it's also like building a home, meticulously placing each thing by hand. You're spending a lot of time building a love, building a home together, building a life. And I think she's like, well, we didn't build this for nothing. We were building it for a reason, this relationship. Forcibly like trying to make this work by hand, meticulously placing by hand, reminds me a little bit of Mastermind. Like, I think she was making things happen instead of letting things happen how they were going to. Because again, I think she knew that if she let things happen, it would have ended sooner. Then bringing us to the next stanza, tried wishing on comets, tried dimming the shine, tried to orbit his planet. Some stars never align. This is all the things she did to try to fix it. Exhausted all possible options before she finally gave up. She tried everything to make it work. Wishing on comets, you know, like you wish on a star. Okay, that could also mean just like asking a greater force. I tried to wish and pray and look towards the sky for help. Okay. And then she tried dimming the shine. She tried hiding away with him. She tried not to go out with him, kind of dulling her fame so that he would feel more comfortable. This also reminds me of Bejeweled, dimming your shine, like he didn't let her be jeweled. Tried to orbit his planet. She tried to rearrange her life to fit what he wanted in his life. And I think that's a lesson a lot of people need to learn, especially in relationships, that you shouldn't change yourself or revolve your entire life around someone, because what happens when, or if it doesn't work out, you had just changed everything about yourself to fit them. Now you're a little bit lost. And I think that's what happened when she got out of that relationship. She felt lost because everything she had done for him and their relationship together. Then she says, some stars never align, which is directly contradicting what she said in Mastermind when she said, once upon a time, all the planets and the fates and all the stars aligned. You and I ended up at the same place at the same time, saying like, it was fate. It was fated that we were meant to be together. But so the fact that she's saying some stars never align now is like kind of looking back in hindsight, being like, well, maybe this wasn't all perfectly planned. The pieces didn't fall exactly into place. And this is kind of like when you fall in love, you have this crystallized, like idealized version of what you think your life is going to be with somebody. And it isn't until it ends that you realize you maximized, you magnified the good things and you completely ignored the red flags, the little things that weren't aligning. And so I think it's only in hindsight that she can admit this. And then we've got the kicker. And in one conversation, I tore down the whole sky. I thought this was interesting because she says, I tore down the whole sky. She was responsible for ending it, which I didn't expect. And I think with this line, she is basically saying like, something that took 6 years to build, put your love, energy, effort into, can end in one conversation. 6 years, all of a sudden, nothing. The harsh line between being with the love of your life, supposedly, and then all of a sudden you were alone at the drop of a hat. And she is taking responsibility for ending it because I think she was the one that needed to call it off. It seems as though he didn't want to end things, but he also didn't want to move forward, and she knew that she wanted to move forward, and she did want a commitment of marriage. And she says that so much throughout this album, and for the longest time everybody thought she didn't want to get married, but it's been all over her entire discography. She has always sung about getting married, having kids, having a family and stuff like that. And I think some people say like maybe she doesn't want that, but she sings about it a lot, so I feel like that is what she wants, and he didn't want that. That's a deal breaker in a lot of people's relationships. It's like you either want the same future and it aligns, and just because you love each other doesn't mean you guys have the same idea for the future. So yeah, they were kind of in limbo, and she decided this needs to end because I'm not going to be stuck in this like stagnant place for any longer. And now we get into the juicy tea. We're halfway through the poem now. Spring sprung forth with dazzling freedom hues. We all know, I just feel like this stanza is so direct because the Eras Tour started in spring. That is also when the breakup was announced. She was on the Eras Tour having the best time ever. She was dazzling. She feels lighter. Dazzling freedom hues. Then a crash from the skylight bursting through. Something old, someone hollowed, who told me he could be brand new. Here he comes into the picture, and it seems unexpected. When she says a crash from the skylight, it just seems like it's not something maybe she fully sought out, but he saw his opening and he came barreling through, coming in hot to try and be the knight in shining armor, but he was just a rat. Oh my god. When she says something old, it's like an old rekindled flame, and something hollowed, that means sacred, someone important, someone from her past, and someone that has always been sacred to her, a relationship. I was reminiscing just the other day. And I think the problem was she had always had in the back of her head, what if when he came back into her life, she's like, well, I might as well give it a shot, because I've always wondered about it, and I wonder if I will always have this in the back of my head if I don't do it, if I don't just see what happens. And I think Maddie Healy was her Speak Now moment. When she wrote, I think it was definitely during Speak Now, because she was explaining the song Speak Now, and she's like, you always have that one person in the back of your mind that could interrupt your wedding.
You know, you always kind of have that person, that one person who you feel like might interrupt your wedding and be like, don't do it because we're not over yet. I think everybody has that one person who kind of floats in and out of their life and is never, like the narrative's never truly over.
And I think even when she was with Joe, Maddie Healy was that person still in there somewhere. And we can kind of tell with Guilty as Sin that she did think about him when she was in a relationship. Anyways, he promised that now was the right time. It seemed like they missed each other over a decade of missing each other. You know, one of them is single, but then the other one's in a relationship, and then it switches places, and then, you know, he had a drug problem. It just seemed like it was they were never on the same wavelength. And then finally, it seems as though this is the right time now. And he shows up and he love bombs her. And he's like, we're meant to be together, obviously, because all the stars are aligning. He told her he could be everything that he couldn't be back then. Again, all of what is in this poem is kind of proved by the songs on the album. She's presenting the album as evidence for everything that she is saying in this poem. So when you think about Peter, the song Peter, she says, you said you were gonna grow up, then you were gonna come find me. And that is kind of what this stanza is about. This is also a reference to weddings, you know, when they say something old and something new, something borrowed and something blue. That's like a traditional thing. Like if you choose to follow it, the bride usually has one of all of those things, something old, new, borrowed, and blue. So this last line is kind of following that, something old, something hollowed, who told me he could be brand new. So again, references to weddings. This is where the poem shifts because it goes from talking about the past and explaining the past, now using that context to kind of justify the following actions. So it kind of changes tense a little bit. So we had the past, and now we have what happened currently. So I was out of the oven and into the microwave, out of the slammer and into a tidal wave. I think a lot of people were confused by this line at first because they're like, oven, microwave, like what is she doing writing that into a poem? But it's actually the perfect way to explain this. She is placing these two relationships side by side in such a way that you are forced to see the differences between them and explaining like why one might have been more heartbreaking than the other. The oven, she's talking about her 6-year relationship. It was a slow burn and a slow death. It fizzled out towards the end, and by the end of it, it's just kind of like you gave it your 6 years of that relationship and it's not gonna work out. She had lost hope over a few years. She had a lot of time to come to terms with the end of that relationship. It wasn't just one day she woke up and it was over. It was a slow end until she finally cut it off, and by that point she was probably already ready to move on, which is why like women move on faster because they have already mourned the relationship in their head a lot of the times. And so before a relationship actually is over, the minute it's like over in your heart and your mind, that's when you start the process of grieving the end of it, maybe while you're still in the relationship. And then by the time that it's actually over, you have kind of moved on. And I think that's what she's saying when she says out of the oven and then into the microwave. When you're looking at an oven and a microwave, obviously things take longer to cook in the oven. That's why the microwave exists, so that you can cook something up in a few minutes. And that's exactly the parallel she's drawing here. She went into a dumpster fire immediately after this breakup of 6 years. It was fast. It was a long-awaited thing that they were able to be together because they had been in each other's lives for a decade, wondering if one day they would have a go at it. Out of the Slammer is obviously a reference to Fresh Out the Slammer, the song, and Into a Tidal Wave being like she was free and then she crashed right into something that was way bigger than she was expecting it. Like she did not expect that to come into her life and change it the way that it did. He was the metaphorical knight in shining armor who showed up when she was at her loneliest hour, and that's why it was like right place, right time, because it started to sink in that she had spent the past 6 years of her life with somebody and now she didn't have anyone, so she felt lost. How gallant to save the empress from her gilded tower, swinging a sword he could barely lift. And again, she's using this like symbol, like being locked away in a tower with her previous relationship, and he came to save her and take her out of the tower and show her off. Swinging a sword he could barely lift is probably the funniest line in this whole poem, because she's basically saying like, he did not have the capacity to fix me in that moment. Like, he was way over his head getting himself into this situation with me. It just seemed like he might have not been the most mentally stable as well. So like, he could barely save her is what she's trying to say. Like, he was not equipped to be doing this, to be getting into this relationship either. But loneliness struck at that fateful hour, low-hanging fruit on his wine-stained lips. This is the line that made my sister like immediately say Matty Healy, because he's known at his shows for like drinking out of a wine bottle straight, and
they shook their heads saying God help her when I show good.
again, I don't really know if it's a bit. I think most of it is just like an act he puts on, but it definitely makes me think of that situation, because it just seems like when she says low-hanging fruit, that is another like religious reference to kind of Eve and temptation. Like, she was tempted by the fruit that she was told not to eat, and she did it anyway, and then she had this fall from grace, and that's exactly how Taylor is kind of portraying the situation. Like, I was tempted because he showed up and he told me that he could be the best thing that ever happened to me, and so I took the bait and it didn't work out. But she's showing the extremes of the two relationships. She went from safe, comfortable, yet unfulfilled and stuck, to intense, short-lived, fast-paced passion, and that caused an even more intense fall. And that's why you see, like, everyone's like, I don't get it. Why is she writing about Matty Healy if they were only together for 6 weeks? And I feel like this is like one of the most relatable things Taylor has done, because it's like, really, it's not time that matters, it's the circumstances. And like she said, slow burn means slow ending. You don't feel anything at the end of it because you felt it all over the course of 6 years. When you feel everything from a whole relationship in 6 weeks, there's just a lot more intense feelings, I feel like. I think that's what Taylor is trying to get across here. Then she says, he never even scratched the surface of me. None of them did. That took me aback, because I was like, wow. She realized in hindsight that she was never going to be fully fulfilled by these relationships. And I feel like you don't know that someone truly doesn't know you until you have an experience of someone actually truly knowing you. And that is crazy to think about, because, you know, you're saying like in 6 years, she still says they never scratched the surface of me after 6 years? And she's so confident none of them did. She knows that right now, none of her previous relationships ever truly knew all of her. Literally crazy. Oh my gosh. And this reminds me of the lyric from So High School when she says, no one's ever had me, not like you. That is just crazy to me, honestly. But I get it, because like, wouldn't you think the person she's with right now, like, she wouldn't be with somebody if it wasn't better than her previous relationships? Like, she wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, she wouldn't put herself through that if she didn't think it was overall a better situation. So moving on to our last part of the poem. In quotations, she says, in summation, it was not a love affair. I'm just like staring at this stanza because I'm just like still trying to figure out what she means by it. It was not a love affair. I feel like a 6-year relationship isn't just a love affair, but I also feel like with the context of the rest of the stanza, trying to say like, whatever happened with 6-week Matty Healy was not a love affair. It wasn't what I thought it was. Because then she says, I screamed while bringing my fist to my coffee-ringed desk. And the visual of that, she is just, that is where you like, you feel crazy and you're just like screaming, and she's bringing her fists on her desk and coffee ringed. She's been probably up all night writing, drinking coffee. She manic, you know, when you're manic, sometimes you stay up all night, which, I mean, I get that. She says, it was a mutual manic phase. It was self-harm. It was house and then cardiac arrest. That is literally the whole thing. It was house and then cardiac arrest. She went from one thing that was bad into something else that was also bad but different that she thought was gonna be better. Oh my god. She's letting a little bit of the crazy out. She's getting out of the asylum in this one because she's being so self-aware in this poem and in this album, like I was saying it was self-harm. Because when she says in Fortnight, I took the miracle move-on drug, the effects were temporary. The miracle move-on drug is finding someone new, and it was temporary. That was like more self-harm to get through it than it was actually what she wanted, because then if you think about the rest of Fortnight, she says, I was a functioning alcoholic. She has these temporary vices that get you through it temporarily, but then you still have to deal with the problem after you come down from that, after you're numbing the pain. It's still gonna be there, it's just temporarily gone. That's what she means by it was self-harm. Drinking too much is self-harm and self-medicating. You know that it's like a self-inflicted coping mechanism. And then we have the last line, it was house, then cardiac arrest. House arrest is again, we're kind of taking these terms from like court, where like if someone gets sentenced to house arrest, they can't leave their house. That's how she felt in the long-term relationship. It was house arrest and then cardiac arrest when she got with Maddie. Literally made her heart explode from the whiplash of him saying I love you and then deciding, actually, we can't do this anymore. Which I do think it was probably like a mutual, we shouldn't do this anymore, but I feel like him more so, because like it was a dumpster fire. And he's like, actually, I can't come back on those promises I made you all that time ago when I said I would grow up and I would do all these things. Well, that offer has expired. And that's what is said in the song Peter. She says like, oh, all those promises expired after all this time, but you didn't say that. But anyways, that is such a good line. And then this whole thing is good. I don't know why I keep saying that's my favorite line, because then it's always one-ups each other. But a smirk creeps onto this poet's face. She refers to herself as a poet. Obviously, she's a writer. And I think she calls herself a poet to remind us, like, I'm a writer. And zooming out, being like, you are reading everything that's happening in my life because I'm a writer. After this whole roller coaster, she remembers, oh yeah, I write songs. And that's how I get through things, and that's how I'm gonna deal with this. This is what I do best, because it's the worst men that I write best. It's like she's thinking to herself, she's smiling because she's like, oh yeah, no, will give me the best work of my life. The best art comes from suffering, because people love to write about heartbreak, people love to read about heartbreak because that's what they're going through. Personally, and I feel like for a lot of people, it's harder to write about good things, because heartbreak is such an intense emotion that you're trying to figure out, and there's so many layers to it that sometimes when things are good, it's hard to dip into the creative. And that's why it's called the tortured poets department, because it's like they're talking about tortured artists. Oh, I'm such a tortured artist. They love being tortured so that they can write the best work that they can. And when she says like the worst men I write best, it's like her wheels are turning now. She's like, despite everything that has happened, I will turn it into art. And she's eager to get it down on the page now. She's like, it's going on paper now. It's time to get these words out of my head and these feelings outside of me. Then we have the stanza that was revealed with the initial announcement of the album. And so I enter into evidence my tarnished coat of arms, my muses acquired like bruises, my talismans and charms, the tick, tick, tick of love bombs, my veins of pitch black ink. I think this is so interesting that she gave us the ending of this poem with the announcement without hearing the album, because I feel like this makes so much more sense in the context of this whole poem and in the whole album itself. Because I remember reading this and being kind of confused, because I'm like, love bombs? But it was just her long-term relationship. Like, what does she mean, love bombs? I've been talking so long, my battery died. So now she's bringing it back to what the album is about. and kind of bringing it back to this courtroom metaphor of I enter into evidence. This album is a collection of evidence of her lived experiences. Evidence is physical proof of something, and her lyrics are acting as that proof that something happened. And I thought it was interesting initially, back when she announced the album, saying muses, because that is plural, and everyone's like, okay, well, yes, Joe. But then also, everyone's like, there's no way she's gonna write about Maddie Healy. Like, they weren't together that long. She probably was done by the album. And I feel like a lot of people, myself included, were not thinking that any of these songs would be about Maddie Healy. The denial was so real. If you watch my reaction, I was like denying so hard any of the songs are about Maddie Healy.
I still think that total Maddie Healy.
No!
Nobody has shit.
No. Okay, they were together for 1 month.
I don't care.
I was like, there's no way. There's no way she would write about a 6-week situationship. But then, like, after obviously all of this, it just makes so much sense. And she says, my muses acquired like bruises. It's like she's collecting wounds. But when you think about a bruise, it heals over time. There's nothing you can really do to speed up the healing of a bruise. You just kind of let it fade. That is a really telling metaphor, but it's also like a physical reminder of what she went through. And then she says, my talismans and charms, which is giving like witchy vibes. I just looked up talisman because I know what the word is, but I don't know exactly what the definition of it was. And it's an object, typically an inscribed ring or stone that is thought to have magic powers and to bring good luck. My talismans and charms, and I think her art, like her songwriting, her music, is what is her magic power. Like, that is her superpower, is being the best songwriter of our generation. And then she says, the tick 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 of love bombs. That threw me off. Again, like I was saying, I'm like, love bomb? What are you talking about? And now we know that that situationship was love bombing and then retreat. It's like when someone comes on so strong and is sharing intense feelings like right away, like very quickly into a relationship, so that you will kind of like fall more in love with them. They love bomb you. They like tell you, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm in love with you. And then running away, leaving. And it's like, you didn't ask for them to do that. When somebody has such strong and confident feelings for you, you feel safe. And you feel more inclined to share those feelings back. And then the bomb aspect of it is that they completely run away afterward. They retreat and left her to self-destruct, to just kind of implode on herself. All of these experiences are increasing her need to write about it. Like, it's in her blood. It's a biological need and necessity to her mental well-being to write all of it down. And that is when she says, my veins of pitch black ink. It's like a part of her, so strongly ingrained in her that she needs to make sense of it on the page. And this reminds me of Joan Didion, because I'm trying to think of which short essay it was from, but Joan Didion wrote this line that said, like, I need to write to understand how I'm feeling. I don't understand how I'm feeling until I read what I write. And I think that's how Taylor Swift writes her songs as well. And then we have our very last line here. All's fair in love and poetry. Sincerely, the chairman of the Tortured Poets Department. And obviously this is a play on all's fair in love and war, which means like there are no rules when it comes to war or love. And then she is adding this third element of poetry and writing. She is proving a point about authors and writers and people who use their own life to create their art. What is fair if you can't write the truth of what happened? You can be criticized for writing so publicly about somebody, but that is what she has dealt with her entire life and has not let that stop her from creating her most raw and honest art. Because if you censor yourself and you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't write this because they'll be upset, or people will think I'm being mean, or people won't receive this in whatever way I was meaning it. She always wrote and put out songs despite that fear. It's just what songwriters do, and I think that is what has completely changed the upcoming songwriters. Like the Gen Z songwriters and singers are more honest and vulnerable in their songs than they've ever been. And I think we're having this like influx of songwriters and people creating their own songs that are so deep and so honest. And I think honestly that's like a huge impact of Taylor Swift's discography. She has always written how she feels exactly the way she feels it without catering to the people she's writing about, obviously. She even put out Dear John, literally name dropping people, putting her most vulnerable diary thoughts into her songs for the sake of art. For the sake of us, just one person relating to what she was going through. A raw nerve that she never shied away from. And I feel like that is just the best thing you could be as a writer in general. But yeah, that last thought there, all's fair in love and poetry. All bets are off. And I feel like if you date Taylor Swift, you should know that. You just know. Like, if you're dating an artist, a singer, and you expect them not to write a song about you when you're in their life for that long, I don't know. But I just want to give some final thoughts on this poem and just in relation to the album as a whole. Essentially, the Tortured Poets Department is an album of a woman pleading temporary insanity to justify her reaction to heartbreak, which is so real. Her life is constantly under scrutiny and she's going through public breakups and public relationships that everyone feels like they are entitled to weigh in on. It's just not fair. And so she's like, well, if that's gonna happen, I am going to set the record straight here. This poem brings me back to so many pieces of literature about how tortured a lot of these famous writers are in their works. I feel like Taylor is kind of bringing this back, like the over dramatic, I'm gonna write all of these songs about this situation that happened because there's so many feelings to be felt. And this reminded me of Petrarch, who was an Italian poet who wrote like 500 sonnets about a woman he was in love with, like helplessly in love with, but had never actually met. And like, how dramatic is that? Like, how outrageous and insane. People are calling Taylor dramatic for writing all these songs about these relationships when men have always been the most dramatic writers. Like Shakespeare, he wrote so many poems, so many dramatic poems about love, and he is highly esteemed in our literature. So I'm just saying that it isn't that strange that she decided to work off of this concept. It's just been around for literally ever, as long as writing has existed. I feel like Taylor is summoning all the powers of tortured poets in times past to bring us back to why people have to put words on a page in the first place, to deal with insane and irrational and crazy emotions. And I think ending this entire album with the manuscript is like the perfect ending because she says, the only thing that's left is the manuscript. You know, when she is long gone, all we're gonna have is her songs. That is true of every single writer. Once they are gone, all we are left with are their words. I just got chills. But it's like the test of time. The stories we tell, the songs we sing, the books that we read are all that's going to be left for future generations. One last souvenir from my trip to your shores. She's detaching herself from her work in this way so that people can listen to it and think about their own experiences when they hear the words. And that's what she's always tried to do. She's like, when I put something out, it's not mine anymore. The words in the song are talking about your experience, what you can relate to. And then she says, now and then I reread the manuscript. And when she's singing songs from her past and she's looking back on her work, she is not that person anymore, so she can detach from it. She can go back and reflect on it, but it's not her story anymore. And that is so true of so many of her songs have like evolved. Like All Too Well is the perfect example because at one point that was her lowest, that was her deepest heartbreak, that was the saddest song. She could barely sing it live, crying through the piano, and now it is the most joyous song to her because of what it became after that. Has a different whole life now, and that's what she's trying to do with all of her music. music, and she says, "But the story isn't mine anymore. The story isn't mine anymore." And that's all that a writer can hope for, is that the people that now have access to your writing feel like they can hear their own story from your words. As someone who just loves lyrics and poetry and really like letting the meaning of writing sink in, this album has been like the best thing ever, because I just think Taylor is so clever, so smart with this album. Not everybody is getting the full picture. They're not getting as much out of it as they could be, and I encourage you to really look into these songs and really let the lyrics sink into you. I feel like there's so much to be learned, not just from Taylor's life, but just life in general, and just truly just about like human connection. How we're all just people living our lives and going through all the same things, regardless of who we are, where we are. That's why Taylor has such a wide audience. She just writes about the human experience, and it's beautiful. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, this deep dive breakdown of this poem. Let me know, as always, if you guys have any thoughts about any of the meaning and symbolism, and any thoughts, anything you have, comment down below. I'd love to see what you guys think about this poem. Let me know if you guys want me to do any other breakdowns or deep dives into the lyrics of any of these songs and whatnot. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. Gosh, when I get like deep into Taylor's words, I get very introspective and emotional. Like, that was towards the end there. I was feeling very in my feels. Do you guys like my new cardigan? I think it's so cute. This is the softest cardigan out of all of them. It's got the patch on it. I love this one. It looks so good. It will match with many more things than the other cardigans. I also have my necklace, my Tortured Poets necklace. So cute. Yeah, a little merch haul for you. Okay, now I'm gonna go listen to the Black Dog on repeat.